Yeah, g'day team. Welcome back to another episode of ruggerzheadz Sports Chat. We're going to cover off another great round of NRL Round 4 and yeah, well, let's get into it. Firstly, on the rugby, we've only got 4 days before Super Rugby Aotearoa starts again. Finally, some live rugby. It'll be the only rugby in the world, and I think it'll be the first live sport in the world with crowds since COVID sort of made an impact on sport around the place. So yeah, I'll be at the Eden Park watching the Blues versus Hurricanes this Sunday. Hopefully we get to see Beauden Barrett and Dan Carter on the field at the same time. It'd be great. And Beauden Barrett up against his old Hurricanes team, and Geordie Barrett, his brother, still playing for the Hurricanes. I'm not sure if Geordie's going to play. He's under an injury cloud. I saw a headline today, so we'll have to wait and see what the teams are going to be this week. Anyway, back to the league. The first game was the Broncos versus the Roosters. This was just the most one-sided game you will come across probably this year. It's the biggest defeat the Broncos have ever had in their history. The Broncos are such a young team, and you could tell that the inexperience really showed. The Roosters were just so strong with the extra space. They are lethal. They have attacking weapons everywhere, and they still didn't have, James Tedesco, so they can only get better, you'd imagine. It was great to see the Morris brothers play really well. Looked like they enjoyed playing together too, which was really good. And Victor Radley had a great game. Having sort of a mobile middle forward with a bit of playmaking ability definitely can make a difference and with the speed of the game the way it is at the moment. From a fantasy point of view, Payne Haas top scored in the game with 85, and so did Lindsay Collins, who also scored 85. The reserve prop for the Roosters made a line break and scored a try, good meters, and it was quite a good matchup to see Collins and Lodge going toe to toe. You don't sort of see guys picking out each other and lining each other up. So it was quite cool to watch. I would suggest that Collins got the better of Lodge in the game. From a poor fantasy result point of view, Anthony Milford is really struggling at the moment. If you do have him in your team, he's probably a sell until he starts scoring well again. So yeah, Milford's really struggling at the moment. If his team's not doing well, and his forwards aren't going forward, then he's got no room to move and can't do anything off the back of that. Next game up on the Friday was the Panthers versus the Warriors up in Campbelltown. Panthers scored 26, Warriors 0. Even without Cleary, the Panthers were still pretty good. I mean, maybe it shows more how bad the Dragons are, because the Warriors didn't do that well against the Panthers. Warriors beating Dragons last week probably was more a reflection on how poor the Dragons are, because the Warriors are definitely struggling and the injuries definitely aren't helping. The new kid for the Panthers, Matt Burden, playing in the halves while Nathan Cleary's out, scored 70. Well, he's averaging 77 after 2 games. Tohu Harris scored 74 without a try for the Warriors, and Coruscant had his lowest score this season with 46, which is not bad. It's a pretty good pass mark, and he's still going up in value, maybe because the Warriors didn't offer too much in attack. He had maybe less tackles than normal, so he scored less points. I think he was rested played slightly less minutes because he got rested in the end of the game. Tuivasa Sheck has dropped 100,000 in value and has a break even of 60, so he's likely to keep dropping. He's struggling to find the form he had last year with the way the Warriors are playing at the moment. So that second game on Friday night was the Storm versus Rabbitohs. Storm won 22-8 up in Amy Park. Both teams were looking to bounce back from bad performances last week. It was a good close first half with the Storm scoring 2 tries, which were really good tries. Was a good close first half with the Storm scoring 2 really good tries, but kept the Bunnies scoreless in the second half to win the game. Cook top scored with 71 from the game, but Cameron Smith has a slightly higher average of Damien Cook at 60.5. Still, Smith is the fantasy GOAT. Another player to watch is Latrell Mitchell. He scored 63 from that game, and that's his highest score this season against good opposition too. So definitely keep an eye on him. He's bottomed out in price now, so might be worth picking up. But there's a few good centre options at the moment as well. I probably wouldn't pick him as wing fullback until he strings a few more scores together. Josh Adokar scored only 13 with a try, but he wasn't playing at 100% because he had hurt his rib earlier in the game. The first game up on Saturday was the Eels versus Sea Eagles, which was definitely the game of the round. I sort of suggested that would be the case last week, and it certainly was. The Sea Eagles were only able to score a penalty kick in the first half, and the Eels scored twice, but the Sea Eagles were able to sort of get their way back into the game in the second half. With 7 minutes to go, Mitchell Moses kicked a field goal off the post to go out to a 7-point lead with 7 minutes to go. Jordan Tafua scored a great try in the corner with 3 Eels players on him trying to take him out of field of play. So the Eels were playing really well. And there was 3 minutes to go. The score was 19-16 to the Eels at that point. The Seagulls missed the kick, so the score didn't change. With less than 1 minute to go, the Sea Eagles made a play down the right, and Ruben Garrick made his way over the try line, but they disallowed it because of a forward pass. So Tommy Turbo catch and pass across to Ruben Garrick, and the ball clearly came out the back of the hand, came out backwards out of the hand and drifted sort of forward. I would suggest it was it was sort of a line ball. Camera angle picked it up perfectly, but the referees had sort of ruled already, and but the bottom line is the Sea Eagles were robbed. It was a fair try based on the current rules. I guess you could debate whether you agree with the rule or not, but the current rule is if the ball comes out the back of the hand, and it drifts forward because of momentum, that's acceptable. So that will be talked about a lot going forward. We'll hear plenty of it, and definitely worth taking a look at the highlights for that game. It was an absolute cracker. Mitchell Moses this year is a consistent fantasy scorer again, averaging over 60. Dylan Walker's been playing well too, finally looking like he's getting back to his old form, and averaging 40 in fantasy, so could be a centre option if he can pick his scores up slightly. DCE is, Daly Cherry Evans is worth talking about, absolutely. He's averaging 60. Hasn't scored a single try, hasn't got a try save, kicked a goal, hasn't got made a line break, and only 1 try assist out of 4 games, and still averaging over 60. I think his scores can only go upwards from here. Danny Levi only scored 16 points. He scored 54 last week, so there's probably a few people sort of keeping an eye on him. 16 points for a hook is just not good enough if he's playing 60 minutes or more. Cowboys versus the Sharks up in Townsville. Got this tip wrong. Probably should have changed it last minute after hearing Hess was out for the Cowboys, and they're just not the same team without Taumalolo. Looks like he'll be back this week too, which is great news for them. It was a pretty close game for most of it, and the Bunkers certainly had a good workout. The Cowboys were denied a try with only 16 minutes to go. And that was basically the end of the game. There was no more scoring after that. So, but if the Cowboys, it was a marginal call, but probably the right call. But if they had managed to score, the result could have been slightly different. Jack Williams, the lock for the Sharks, scored 33 as a starting lock. This isn't sort of what you would expect. If you still have him in your team, then you should trade him out. I traded him out last week, so he's gone. And in that game, generally speaking, there were a lot of pretty low fantasy scores. Raiders versus Knights, pretty big upset, probably the upset of the round. The You know, the Raiders had come off a great win against the Storm in Melbourne, and then to get beaten by the Knights 34-18, it's not what people would have expected. The Knights, they dominated pretty much all areas of the game, and they look like a real proper threat this year. Kalen Ponga coming back from suspension was absolutely great. He had to be the man of the match. From a fantasy point of view, he top scored with 93. And in fact, out of that game, the top 3 scorers for the round were from this game. Papali'i scored 87 after a great try. And Bradman Best also scored 87 after having a great game. He scored in the first minute and also in the last minute. And definitely a must-buy if you don't have him at this stage. Could be a potential keeper at centre at this point, and is in dual position with wing fullback. Chance Nickel-Clockstead has dropped 113k and still dropping, so he's short of form from last year. Titans versus Tigers at Suncorp. Technically a home game for the Titans. Titans won this one 28-23. Again, another upset. It went down to the wire. It was 12 all at halftime. The Tigers looked like they had the game in hand with a late drop goal to Benji Marshall with 4 minutes to go. And it was after that, Titans kicked off, didn't make the 10, bounced a couple of times, and then they managed to regather after it made the 10-metre mark, which no one can play at it until it does. And managed to score a great team try. The boys were so stoked. It was good to see. The Titans hadn't won a game in 12 months, so it was a long time coming, and they were pretty pumped about it. Harry Grant for the Tigers, from a fantasy point of view, what do you say? I mean, this kid's a future GOAT. Seeing Cameron Smith playing and sort of towards the end of his career, and seeing a young kid like Harry Grant come through who has all the skills that a footy player could have. Only 30% of teams have Harry Grant. I don't know why everyone doesn't. He scored another 80 points and top scored the game. Twal still playing big minutes at lock, and has always been a good points per minute player. Dale Copley and Anthony Don scored 17 points between them, which included a try. For a team that wins, having your outside score that little is pretty average. Dragons versus Bulldogs. Dragons they are just a really bad rugby league team. Let's put it that way. They're really struggling at the moment. I don't know what they're gonna do to get back in form, but they've got to find a way. All the changes that the Dragons made to the team didn't help them. The Dragons scored the first points, which was a penalty after 4 minutes, and when they were hot on attack, and they looked like they should have scored from that play, and in all fairness, they should have probably gone for the try rather than the penalty kick. They didn't score again after that. The Doggies love their goal kicking wingers. Meaney kicked 5 from 5, including a couple of penalties. From a fantasy point of view, Cameron McInnes scored another 81 points, and still played 80 minutes with Isaac Luke on the bench, which is good to see for his owners. Tyson Frizzell had his lowest score of the season, which was 48, and that's pretty respectable, still averaging over 56. Pretty good value, I'd still suggest. And Williami would have caught a few teams out. He's in a lot, and with 25% of teams owning him, and he only scored 3 points. I had him, and so I went from Jesse Arthurs for 2 weeks in a row, and then I had Williami scoring 3. So, needless to say, my team's in a pretty bad state, and I would not recommend taking much of my advice. Williami looks like he's out for a few weeks as well. So it was another great round of rugby league. I'll put another video up to talk about the upcoming round in the next couple of days, and try and talk about the rugby that's coming up as well. Should just about cover it.